name is Ben Radcliffe. I'm president of the South Dakota Farmers Union, our state's largest farm organization headquartered in Huron. I think the state planning agency should be commended for sponsoring this series of hearings. There can be no question that South Dakota needs a comprehensive plan for the future. If our state does not set goals, it cannot expect to move progressively through the last quarter of this century. These hearings, if they live up to their potential, must gather information from the various groups or sections that make up our state. For the state planning agency to underestimate the importance of agriculture to South Dakota's future would be nothing short of a tragedy. For a variety of reasons, some of them understandable, planning groups have traditionally overlooked economic development in the farm sector of our state's economy. I think the best explanation of that is that so many leaders have so little understanding of the significance and basic problems of agriculture. I believe it would be short-sighted indeed to look toward the 21st century without recognizing the vital role agriculture will play. The food and fiber producers of this nation, because of the projected increase in world population, are going to continue to be the backbone, the very heart of the South Dakota economy. South Dakota loses 1,200 farms annually, which represents a greater number of farms than are in an average county. In other words, the equivalent of one county's farms are lost every year. And with these farms go rural communities, churches, schools, and Main Street business places. In fact, for every 6 farms that are forced out of operation, one business place closes its door. That is not a very bright picture, yet it is visible in every part of the state. With these thoughts in mind, Farmers Union has prepared its comments today. I'm going to present briefly what this farm group believes should be of utmost importance in the development of the comprehensive plan being sought through these hearings. We have divided our thoughts into several categories: tax reform, corporation farming, transportation, and revitalization of the South Dakota Department of Agriculture. First, tax reform. The South Dakota Farmers Union has gone on record time and time again detailing its views on what is the pressing need for tax reform. Despite our pleas and those of other groups, South Dakota is still in the awkward position of facing the 1970s with a 19th century tax structure. I'm sure you remember that in 1970, farmers joined together to put an initiated income tax measure on the general election ballot. Nearly 40% of the voters expressed their support, and 60% of all farmers voted favorably. Unfortunately, this people's tax bill lost. After trying unsuccessfully in 1971 to convince the state legislature of the necessity of tax reform, Farmers Union decided to take a very bold step. It filed a lawsuit in federal district court in Sioux Falls, challenging the constitutionality of using the regressive property tax as a main source of revenue for public schools. That historic suit is now pending in court. Out of respect for the court, I am not at liberty to predict the chances of a favorable ruling. Should the judge rule in our favor, South Dakota will no longer be able to put off reforming its tax system. I can predict here today, however, that a dramatic change in our system of taxation is inevitable. Farmers Union has said many times that our state's backward tax structure is a most distressing barrier to progress in general and to economic development in particular. Recognizing the importance of the agricultural segment of the South Dakota economy, one can see very easily why regressive taxes are such a big barrier. Farmers and those in other industries have literally been discouraged from improving their operations by excessive, if not outrageous, personal and real property taxes. There can be no doubt that the rising property tax has been a depressant over the entire South Dakota economy. Whether a city resident is considering building a home or even another room onto his house, or the farmer or businessman is considering a major construction project, the property tax discourages such progress. I have no idea how many farmers would have been able to stay on their farms or what amount of construction and expansion would have been possible just in the last 10 years if it had not been for the excessively high property tax. No plan for the future of South Dakota can be taken seriously if it does not point out the need for restructuring the tax system as a first step. A progressive tax system can open doors we have been unable to consider in the past. I am prepared to go on record today saying that South Dakota's tax system is its main barrier to moving forward. Farmers Union summarizes its tax philosophy by pointing to the need for a state net income tax on corporations as well as individuals, and the abolishment of the personal property tax, reduction of the real property tax, and drastic reduction, if not complete elimination, of the sales tax. It is incumbent on the state planning agency to recognize that no plan can be realistic without the inclusion of a dramatic, far-reaching tax reform. Corporation farming. No comprehensive plan could be considered valid if it overlooks the rise of corporate conglomerates in agriculture. Nothing is more destructive to the economy or a more serious threat to the social, political, economic well-being of South Dakota. The future status of farming depends heavily upon whether the conglomerate trend in industry continues unchecked. The faster agribusiness goes conglomerate, the more certain it is that farming will be swallowed up, mainly because it is the practice of conglomerates to swallow up businesses as nonchalantly as a pelican swallows a fish. The net result of this trend toward conglomerates is that high-bracket, non-farm taxpayers with farm investments enjoy a competitive advantage over farmers. Corporations bid up the price of farmland beyond that which would prevail in the absence of special tax rules. Furthermore, farm operators who depend primarily on farming must compete in the marketplace with those who consider farm profits unnecessary for their purposes. To emphasize the importance of this issue, it may be noted that an increasing number of investment advisors have advertised that they can and will arrange farm tax loss plans. Farmers Union believes very strongly that the policy of this state should be to do everything possible to keep farmers on the land and to prevent corporations from taking over. Already, corporations own 1.6 million acres of valuable farmland in South Dakota. Already, thousands of farmers have had to abandon their farms. Businesses have had to close their doors. Farmers Union requests the state planning agency to include in its comprehensive state plan a goal to prohibit conglomerate farming and to work to bring prosperity to independent family farms. Transportation. At the present time, South Dakota's transportation system, if it merits being called a system, is in a very poor situation. Only a handful of cities are served by all-season roads, and the railroads are tearing up tracks instead of preparing for the future. Farmers Union believes a reasonable highway system should be encouraged that will meet the state's growing need for car and truck traffic. Agriculture depends heavily upon trucking, and any development in agriculture and other industries will require adequate roads. However, currently many people are underestimating the importance of rail transportation. Rail freight is infinitely more efficient than any other method, and it has the capacity of larger, heavier loads. The fact that trains contribute less to pollution alone is a significant factor when considering the future. Since 1964, South Dakota has lost nearly 500 miles of rail service. Currently, the railroads have either applied or indicated their intent to abandon countless more miles of their track. While the larger cities are probably not in immediate danger, most of the state is apt to lose rail service in the next 10 years. It would seem the loss of freight service would be a serious handicap in the development of the rural areas of South Dakota. Farmers Union believes a comprehensive plan for the state should consider whether or not significant development is possible at all without the availability of good freight transportation. The railroad network is so vital to our state's future progress that we believe that the state should intervene at every hearing, challenge every decision of rail abandonment, even to the extent of going to court if necessary. The lack of an adequate transportation system is most certainly a detriment to the state. Most certainly we must plan for reversing the trend and building better transportation rather than to slip backward year after year. The State Agriculture Department. It is becoming increasingly more obvious that South Dakota has a great need for a strong, viable Department of Agriculture. A state which depends as heavily upon agriculture as ours does should certainly have a central department to coordinate farm-related departments, commissions, and boards. To show very graphically what we are now dealing with in terms of uncoordinated and often autonomous boards and commissions, consider the three following examples of how state agriculture committees and commissions are financed. One way is through direct appropriation. An example is the Soil Conservation Committee. A second group includes the Wheat Commission and the American Dairy Association, which derive their funds as a result of state law which authorizes them to collect from producers. A third example is the State Brand Board, which is authorized under law to collect fees from producers for a direct service required by state law. I'm sure that it is not generally understood by most South Dakota people that we have this maze of statewide committees and commissions, most of them serving a useful purpose, but with little or no coordination from state government or governmental officials. This fragmented yet growing bureaucracy spread throughout state government, even outside of it, has canceled the positive effect so desperately needed. Farmers Union believes the plan for the future should include a massive revitalization of the South Dakota Department of Agriculture. The potential for the department is staggering. Just coordinating the mass of vital agricultural statistics is important. Beyond that is the promotion of farm products, inspections, building an avenue for unifying agricultural economic sectors, and helping to map agriculture's future in South Dakota. Even though no one denies the dependence upon agriculture, nowhere in state government today is there a real home or focal point for agriculture. Top state officials have no place to turn for the basic data and research a strong department could provide. Much could be said about the neglect of agriculture by state government, but today we're talking about the future. Farmers Union advocates an active, progressive South Dakota Department of Agriculture, and we believe the department can be the launching pad for agricultural development in the state. Without a strong department, development will be uncoordinated and, in brief, utter confusion. We urge the State Planning Commission to adopt the principle of a strong agricultural department to coordinate rural development. In conclusion, what I have said here today can be summarized by saying that South Dakota does indeed have some serious problems that require comprehensive planning for the future. Our state must adopt bold approaches to these situations and set policy that will pick South Dakota up by the bootstraps and head it toward the 21st century. Again, I want to thank the State Planning Agency for this opportunity to appear at this hearing, and please accept the best wishes of the Farmers Union in your efforts to chart the future course of this great state of South Dakota. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm sure members of the panel will have some questions. I'd like to start out by asking you about your position on corporate farming. I can understand some concern in South Dakota about conglomerates and the possible intervention of outside corporations in farm business simply for tax write-offs. Does your position extend to prohibit corporate farming where the major purpose of the corporation is farming?
No, as a matter of fact, we supported a bill in the legislature last year that would very simply have prohibited corporations from engaging in agriculture unless at least 80% of their gross return came from farming. You see, we don't get too concerned about a corporation that must depend on farming for a major source of their income. What we really are concerned with is a conglomerate which has farming as a sideline, or, for example, a feed company that goes into the feeding business of livestock in a big way, but really doesn't need to make a profit feeding their livestock because they're moving this feed. Or a Tenneco Oil Company, which they say owns J.I. Case and, of course, owns oil fields and fertilizer plants, and really don't need to make a profit on farming because they make a profit on the rest of their business. Farming to them is a tax loss. In addition to that, it's a capital gains feature where they buy and develop land and keep it long enough to receive the capital gains on the sale. And we find ourselves in a position as independent farmers of being forced to sell in the same market. What we raise sell in the same market as these advantaged conglomerates do, or really don't need to make a profit on what they're marketing. And this is the real danger. And I don't think we're far removed from the threat. The Cannon Towel Company is buying land in Sully County. Last night, the Daily Plainsman carried a list of the producers, agricultural producers in South Dakota, who received more than $20,000 in federal payments. Cannon Towel Company was among them, and several other out-of-state corporations. Well, I don't suppose Cannon Towel really expects to make much money raising wheat in Sully County or whatever they're doing over there. They own that land for some other purpose, but they're competing with a farmer who has to make a profit at farming, and we can't do it. This, I think, is the main threat.
We've seen a pretty marked trend towards consolidation of farms in South Dakota over the last several decades, and I don't think it really diminished much between 1960 and 1970. We lost, 1,200 farmers per year?
We average a loss of about 1,200 farms. It ranges from 1,000 to 15, give or take.
Right.
So.
And this seems to be proceeding almost uniformly in all areas of the state. When do you think this will bottom out? Or do you see it as an accelerating trend or diminishing trend? Or, of course, it has significance to us because consolidation of farms is really depopulation.
Well, it's been a continuous trend, as you say, for some years, and if we continue on as we are with little or no concern about what's happening, I presume it will continue. And I'm not sure that we in South Dakota or that you as a planning committee can really halt this kind of an exodus from the farm. We can throw in some stopgap methods like legislation that would restrict corporation farming, tax reform. All of these will help. But sometime in history, and I hope in near history, we're going to have to decide as a nation what we want this country to look like in 5, 10, or 20 years down the road. Do we want this nation to be a factory in the field type agriculture, or do we want to maintain the independent farmers in the small town rural communities that we have in our country? And until the Congress of the United States and any administration that's in office determines that we need to take a hard look at what's happening to rural America, do we really want it to disappear? Now, we're losing the equivalent of one county a year, and you follow that far enough, and you know what happens. So I think it's more than something that we can deal with locally. By that, I don't mean we should give up, because we need to do what we can at the state level, but I'm convinced it's a larger than a state issue, and it will have to be dealt with eventually at the national level by the United States Congress and by an administration who is determined to stop this exodus from the country, which does nothing more than build problems for the city. This isn't hard to correlate. The exodus from the country is build problems in the slums and in the cities, and it's all interrelated. And it seems to me we need to take a hard look at stopping this outflow of rural America.
Well, Ben, one of the comments that we heard somewhere, I get things all mixed up now, we've been to many, but a comment we heard somewhere was to the effect that development of it, irrigation as a statewide project would tend to slow down the consolidation of farm holdings, that irrigation in some way make the smaller unit a more viable farm. Would you agree with that or disagree with it?
Well, it depends on what type of irrigation you're talking about. Irrigation that we're going to see in this part of South Dakota, the Oahe irrigation unit, which derives water from a federally created water supply. As you know, there are federal laws that say that no one person can irrigate over 160 acres with federally supplied water. Now, this means that if he has a wife, he can irrigate, twice that much, and if he has some children, he may incorporate them in as owners. And so, to that extent, in federal projects, no doubt, but what this will keep more people on the land. On the other hand, some of the big projects that we see on the West Coast, which are not regulated by that law, turn into be a bonanza for huge corporations. You have the migrant farmer. That's where farm labor has become organized out there. Cesar Chavez has really had a field day out there because these giant corporations have exploited the opportunity of irrigation, and so it will happen unless there's some restrictions. And I think it all comes back to my earlier statement that the nation as a whole is going to have to decide just what we want rural America to look like and set down some guidelines for it. Otherwise, we're just going to go the way that the European countries went in the 15th and 16th century, and we'll end up with a kind of a feudal system. And then we'll have a revolution, and we'll start all over again, Bill. I mean, these things happen unless somebody decides to put a stop to it.
I have no further questions.
Mr. Radcliffe, John Brophy mentioned, as we've heard in other areas of the state, this county reorganization concept. Has your organization taken a look at that or thought about that?
Well, Bob, I'm sure we've thought about it. We have no position on it, and you know, without me telling you, that this is when the time comes to really deal with that matter, is going to be a very controversial issue. Farmers, by their very nature, are independent people. That's part of our problem. You see, we're all grandsons of pioneers who came here because they wanted their independence, and we've retained a lot of that independence in the second and third generation. And they're going to be reluctant to give up township government, let alone merging counties. And I expect that one day it will come, and it'll be tough. I think somebody said it'll be tougher than school reorganization, and I guess it will. But it's progress that will move in, I'm sure, someday.
Also, Mr. Radcliffe, he mentioned this livestock feeding, and we've heard this in other parts of the state, primarily from people that aren't directly involved. People like myself look at the figures and say there are this many cattle and this much grain and so on. But do you have some thoughts on that?
Well, I listened a while ago to the discussion, and I concur in part that the average age of a farmer, it isn't as high as 58 or 59. I think it's 49. It's right around 50. But I presume that this may well be an element in making the determination of whether or not a farmer at that age in his life wants to change his type of operation. I think that we need to remember that cattle feeding is really no bonanza. It's a high-risk operation. I remember 5 or 6 years ago when IDE or somebody in the state put on a real push to encourage more farmers to feed their cattle and their calves on the farm. And remember, when a cow-calf producer decides to hold back a calf crop for a year and feed it, he's giving up 1 year's income. I mean, he's like going without an income for a year, and then he gets it all in 2 years, or 2 years later, the following year. And this happened, and the price of cattle hit the skids, and thousands of farmers lost a lot of money. And so, number one, it's a high-risk business. It's no bonanza. And number two, I think we're short of credit. I don't think our banks are able or willing to provide the kind of credit that we're going to need if we're really going to keep that livestock here. There's some low-cost credit available through federal agencies such as PCAs. They've gotten to be as conservative as the banks. I mean, they haven't really done all that much good. We need more liberal credit with hopefully a more attractive interest rate to do this job, and more encouragement on the part of everybody. I agree these cattle should be kept here, but the risk is high and the credit is typically unavailable, and this is part of the problem.
Thank you. Ben, one point that you brought out here I thought was very important that hasn't been mentioned before, and that is the importance of the railroads to agriculture and to the state in general.
Right.
Most of us take the railroads for granted, and in the preparedness study that was made by the Civil Defense, we found how important a part they actually play in South Dakota's transportation system. This is very good. I'm hopeful that some emphasis will be placed on a balanced transportation system. We have had some comments made over the state regarding the load limits that have been placed on trucking and what a problem this has created in given areas because of roads and road conditions. Do you have any comments you want to make on that?
Yes, I would, Bill. Well, let me refer back to the railroad situation first before I talk about the chuck holes. You know, I think the railroads are terribly vital to the economy of the total state, not just agriculture, but all the rest. But it doesn't seem to me the state government has gone out, has really laid it on the line to try to retain and maintain rail service. Now, it just seems preposterous to me that the state of South Dakota was willing to go to court and jeopardize $3.5 million of highway money. I mean, go to court to save some billboards and that sort of thing. I think they ought to be willing to go to court to save the railroads. I think they ought to be willing to jeopardize $3.5 million to save the railroads of this country, of this state, because this is where a lot of our industrial and freight potential surely is. I don't know what you do about building more roads, Bill. There are only so many miles of roads can be built with a given number of dollars, and if we lose some federal money, that'll even cut it back further. I live in Huron. We don't have an all-weather road. Redfield doesn't have an all-season road. Aberdeen doesn't have one. You know, and no industry, no big, serious industry is going to come into these areas with no all-weather roads and the potential of very little or no railroads. And so we maintain that transportation is one of the most important, one of the most vital areas of development that we need to take a hard look at if we're going to develop this state industrially. And so the highway situation is terrible. But I don't blame anybody, really. I don't think that the Department of Highway can do any more than they're doing with the resources that they have. It's just a matter of time before we're able to build the kind of roads that we need. I don't know of an alternative at all.
Mr. Radcliffe, well, I may be opening Pandora's box right now, but we have heard in some sections of the state the effect that the Occupational Safe Healthy Act is going to have on the farmers. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, I put my neck on the line on that the other day, in spite of the fact that Congressman Abrask and now Senator McGovern have both introduced bills or indicated their intention to introduce bills to eliminate from the effect of the act employers with 10 or less employees. And I've said I don't buy that at all. I just don't buy that idea at all. I think that an employee of a small businessman is entitled just as much to health and accident protection as the employee of a employer who hires 1,000 men. This OSHA Act was enacted to protect people, to protect employees, and I don't think we should be exempting anybody from it. Now, after having said that, I think that it's ridiculous that the OSHA program is has had its enforcement features run ahead of its education program. So the small businesses are being fined and persecuted because they aren't complying, and in most cases they don't know what they're supposed to do to comply. For the last week, I've been frantically trying to find out how it would affect the farmer who employed farm help. I finally got hold of the Department of Labor, and I think I know now what's going on, but I didn't for a long time, and I doubt if many people do. The rules haven't been written for agriculture yet. They've just, within the last few days, appointed a 15-man committee made up of rural people, one from South Dakota, who are going to sit down now and write the rules as they apply to agriculture. There are only 4 areas of application to agriculture that have been written. One relates to farm labor camps. There are not many farm labor camps in South Dakota. One relates to logging. The rules for logging have been published. One relates to the handling of anhydrous ammonia, a fertilizer. Well, very little of this is done on the farm. This is virtually all done at the dealer's place of business. And the 4th one is the slow-moving object, that triangle, and we're all familiar with that. So those rules have been written, and so we know what they are. But the rest of the farm rules are in the process of being written, and there are none. Now, we can anticipate what's going to happen. California has passed a law that will require, I think, by 1973, that all tractors have roll bars, and all tractors will have to have seat belts, and some hard rules are coming in